If I'd known that pressing play on a stranger's phone would follow me long after I left those mountains, echoing in the back of my skull like something still trying to finish a sentence, I never would have touched it. I keep telling myself it was just a recording, just a file on a half-frozen device. But each night since then, when the woods go quiet, I swear I still hear that sound rising out of the silence. And I can't shake the feeling that when I walked away from that clearing, I didn't walk away alone. 2 days earlier, everything felt normal. I'd set out for a solo trek, nothing dramatic, just a long-planned break from work and noise. I wasn't running from anything, not seeking enlightenment, not chasing thrills. I just wanted the quiet. But even on the first day, the trail felt subtly different from the map's memory. Bends sharper, slopes steeper. I chalked it up to fatigue and the late hour. Still, I pushed on. By the time the second evening arrived, darkness dropped faster than I expected. Clouds rolled in, swallowing the last of the light, and my headlamp barely carved a tunnel through the thickening shadows. I found a small clearing, just enough space for a tent, and set up quickly, fumbling with cold hands. I didn't look around much. The beam lit only the immediate patch of ground, and I was too tired to explore beyond it. No fire, no cooking, just the tent and the hope that morning would come fast. And when it did, sunlight filtered through the nylon in soft, uneven pulses. For a moment, everything felt forgiving. Then I stepped out. That's when I saw it. Another tent, 30, maybe 40 meters away. A dull green dome blending into the trees. My first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. How had I missed something that close? But the answer came almost immediately. There had been no fire last night. No ember glow, no scent of smoke. Nothing to reveal another person camping nearby. Whoever owned that tent hadn't been around for a while. Long enough that they weren't keeping a fire going at all. And that was strange. Hikers don't leave camp unattended for days. Nobody goes deep into the mountains just to abandon their shelter and wander off. Still, curiosity tugged me forward. Each step made the air feel colder, as if the clearing dipped a few degrees nearer the tent's center. Dew clung to the grass, but around the stranger's tent, it was brittle, almost icy. I crouched near the entrance. No footprints, no gear, no signs of recent movement. I gripped the edge of the door flap and slowly lifted it. The inside shimmered white. A thin crust of frost coated everything. The walls, the sleeping bag, even a small metal cup beside a half-unzipped pack. Cold air spilled out, sharp enough to sting my face. And on the floor, half embedded in the frozen layer, lay a phone. Dark, rimmed with ice crystals. For several seconds, I couldn't bring myself to move. Something in me insisted I should back away, leave it untouched, pretend none of this existed. But another part, the rational part, told me that the phone might be the only clue to what happened here. So I reached in, grabbed it, and felt its freezing weight settle into my palm. I didn't know then that pressing play on what it held would unravel the rest of my trip. Back in my own tent, the stranger's phone felt wrong in my hands, like the cold hadn't fully left it even after several minutes inside. I plugged it into my power bank out of instinct more than intention. The cable clicked in, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered once, weak, sluggish, like something waking up that didn't want to be disturbed. A loading icon spun. My breath caught when the lock screen appeared. There was no password. That small detail unsettled me more than the frost had. Most hikers keep their phones locked. Out here, it's your map, your lifeline. Leaving it unprotected felt careless or hurried. I opened the gallery. 2 videos sat at the top, both stamped with the same date, 2 days ago. exactly when the owner had likely vanished. I hesitated with my thumb hovering above the first file, aware of how absurd it was to feel afraid of a recording. But something in the back of my mind, the same something that whispered when I'd seen the frost, tightened like a fist. Still, I tapped the thumbnail. The screen brightened, and a man's face filled the frame. He looked about 33, wearing a dark jacket, eyes tired but focused. Behind him, his own tent stood in the clearing, the same clearing I was in now. Same angle, same trees. He spoke quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being overheard. "I've been hearing it for 2 nights," he said. "Always sometime after 2. I go outside with a light, but there's never anything there. No wind, no branches moving. But it gets close, too close." He adjusted the phone, setting it on a small tripod made from trekking poles. "I'm leaving this recording through the night. Maybe the camera will catch what I can't." He stepped back, zipped his tent, and the screen dimmed as the night swallowed everything. Hours passed in fast-forwarded silence. The tent sat unmoving. The clearing slept. Even in accelerated playback, the stillness felt unnatural, as if the whole forest held its breath. At 2:56 a.m., the phone jolted lightly. The camera trembled. Not much, just enough to feel intentional. Then a low hum seeped into the audio, a sound so deep it made the tiny speaker vibrate. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was too steady, too controlled. Static crawled across the screen, thin at first, then thicker, like veins of frost spreading outward. My heartbeat thudded. I leaned closer. The center of the image darkened. A shape flickered, just for a split second, long enough for my brain to register as something it immediately wanted to unsee. A stretched outline, a head too tall, arms hanging low, past where knees should be. The figure wasn't approaching the tent. The tent seemed to be shrinking from it. A sharp flash erupted, white, blinding. Then the video cut off mid-frame. The phone returned to the gallery as if nothing had happened. I didn't breathe for several seconds. Every hair on my arms stood upright. I replayed the ending in my mind, but it was like trying to hold on to smoke. Every time I thought I had a clear image, it slipped away. My thumb hovered over the second video. I knew I shouldn't look. Every instinct screamed at me that the first recording was already too much, that the second one would be worse simply because it existed. But then a cold draft brushed my neck from inside my tent. I spun around, heart pounding, but nothing was there. Just my gear, my pack, the thin fabric walls. Still, the air felt wrong. Slightly cooler, as if something outside had noticed the phone was awake again. My hand shook as I lowered the device. And for the first time since entering those mountains, I seriously considered packing everything and leaving right then. I sat there for a while, the stranger's phone dimming in my hand as my own breath fogged the air inside the tent. I hadn't pressed play on the second video, but its presence felt louder than anything I had already seen. It sat there on the screen, the same date, the same night, waiting, almost expectant. I couldn't make myself open it. I exited the gallery and locked the phone, as if that simple act could push the unease back into whatever crack it had crawled out of. But the cold creeping through the tent didn't fade. It clung to my sleeves, pressed against my neck, tightened across my chest. There were no holes in the fabric, no tears, no draft that should have existed. And yet the air felt thinner, sharper. That was enough. I had to leave. I tore open my pack with shaking hands, stuffed my stove, clothes, and food inside without any order. I didn't even bother rolling the sleeping bag, just forced it in with frantic pushes. The whole time I kept glancing at the tent's entrance, half expecting the fabric to bend inward or a shadow to fall across it. Nothing happened. That somehow made it worse. I slipped the stranger's phone into my jacket pocket. Not because I needed it, not out of curiosity, but because leaving it behind felt wrong. Someone had gone missing here. Someone had recorded something they didn't understand, and whatever happened to them didn't come from a storm or an accident. I stepped outside. The clearing looked exactly as it had that morning. Sunlight filtering through branches, ordinary, harmless. The other tent still stood where I'd found it, silent, unmoving, frost lining its entrance. But now, after watching the video, the distance between us felt deceptive, as if the space between the two campsites wasn't empty, but watching. I don't know what happened to the person who made those recordings, and I don't know what stood over my tent while I slept. But I'll hand the phone to the rangers and let them figure out what truth is buried in its memory. One thing I know for certain: I never pressed play on the second video, and I never will. They found my tent a week later, exactly where I'd left it. The zipper was closed, my backpack was still inside, my phone was still standing where I'd placed it, facing the tree line. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken branches, and no footprints leading away from the campsite. Not mine, not anyone else's. Just an empty tent in the middle of the Appalachian forest, as if the person who slept there had simply stopped being there. None of that crossed my mind when I drove out into the mountains. Back then, it felt like an ordinary decision, the kind you make when your thoughts won't shut up and you start believing silence might fix you. I told my boss I'd be off-grid for a few days, packed light, shared my route, and headed into the backcountry where a cell signal fades out quietly and never comes back. I wasn't chasing adventure. I wasn't testing myself. I just wanted to be alone long enough to hear my own thoughts again. That's why the first warning was so easy to ignore. The first 3 days passed cleanly. Hike during daylight, set camp before sunset, eat, sleep, repeat. The forest felt neutral, not friendly, not threatening, just present. That kind of quiet makes you careless. It convinces you that nothing is paying attention. The fourth morning was cold enough that my breath fogged the air as soon as I unzipped the tent. I stepped out, stretched, and looked down. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Human. Bare. They were pressed deep into the damp ground beside my tent. Clear toes, long arches, heels sunk heavier than the rest. Whoever made them hadn't rushed or stumbled. The steps were evenly spaced, calm, leading straight from the tree line into my campsite. And then they stopped. The final print sat inches from the tent wall, deeper than the others, like someone had stood there for a moment, facing inward, facing the place where my head rested while I slept. I searched the ground around it, expecting to see a turn, a continuation, something that explained where they went next. There was nothing. No retreat, no disturbance, just leaves and silence. I told myself to leave. I meant it. I started packing fast, hands clumsy, heart beating harder than it should have. But another thought kept interrupting, quieter, steadier. If someone is walking barefoot out here at night, I need to know who. Curiosity still felt reasonable, necessary even. By afternoon, I'd convinced myself to stay one more night, not out of courage, out of proof. I set my phone on a small stand I carried for trail photos and aimed it toward my tent, making sure the tree line was visible behind it. I checked the angle twice, then again. If this is nothing, I said out loud, I'll know by morning. Sleep came light and fractured. Every small sound pulled me halfway awake. Leaves shifting, branches snapping somewhere deeper in the woods. The forest doing what forests do, except now I was listening too closely. Morning felt like relief. I unzipped the tent and looked down immediately. The footprints were back. Closer. Fresher. I grabbed the phone and climbed back inside, hands unsteady, pulse racing. The recording began with darkness. Long minutes of nothing happening. Trees swaying gently, shadows breathing. I almost relaxed. Then, deep in the frame, something stepped out from between the trees. The figure didn't emerge all at once. It stepped forward slowly, as if the forest had been hiding it piece by piece. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its shoulders rising higher than they should have, its arms hanging too low, almost brushing the ground. The proportions were wrong in a way that made my eyes resist understanding what they were seeing. It stopped a few feet from my tent. The phone didn't capture details well in the dark, but I could tell enough. The head was long, smooth, stretched upward like an egg turned on its end. It didn't tilt or turn the way a person's would. It just stayed there, facing the tent, perfectly still. Then the sound started. At first it was barely audible, a thin, breathy whisper layered under the night noise. Not loud enough to form words, but steady, intentional. The kind of sound meant for someone standing very close. The figure leaned in and slightly, as if directing that whisper at the fabric of my tent. And then, the zipper moved. I felt my stomach drop as I watched myself emerge from the tent. Slow, controlled, like I wasn't waking up, just transitioning. I stood upright in front of the thing, feet planted, arms hanging loose at my sides. I didn't hesitate. I didn't react. I just stood there. The whisper grew louder, not clearer, just closer. The figure bent down until its head hovered beside mine, and I saw my own body tilt slightly, offering an ear. Whatever it was saying, it wasn't rushed. It felt practiced, as if this wasn't the first time. The image distorted suddenly. Lines tore through the frame. The sound warped into a low, grinding hum, rising fast. For a split second, the screen flared white, too bright for night, too sharp to be moonlight. And then everything cut out. The recording ended there. No fade, no warning. I sat there in the tent, phone in my hands, trying to force memory into place. I remembered lying down. I remembered being cold. I did not remember standing outside. I did not remember whispering back. That absence felt heavier than fear. The rest of the day passed in fragments. I packed, I unpacked. I walked a short distance down the trail and stopped, staring at the ground like it might give me permission to leave. Every reasonable thought told me to go. But another thought followed it closely. If I leave now, I never find out what happened to me. By late afternoon, curiosity had hardened into something stubborn. I stayed. I told myself it was control, that if I understood it, it couldn't happen again. Before nightfall, I set the phone up the same way as before, aimed at the tent, checking the angle with obsessive care. This time, I planned not to sleep. I lay there fully dressed, eyes open, breathing slow. Minutes dragged, hours blurred. My body grew heavy in a way I didn't expect, like gravity was increasing 1 degree at a time. I blinked once, just once. When my eyes opened again, the forest outside was completely silent, and I knew, without checking the time, that something had already gone wrong. And they started looking for me on the third day, not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. I didn't call, I didn't message, I didn't show up for work. For someone who'd given a clear return date, silence was the first red flag. By the end of the week, a search team was moving through the area I'd marked on my route. They found the campsite first. The tent was still standing. The zipper was closed. My backpack was inside exactly where I'd left it. Food untouched. No signs of animals. No signs of a struggle. It looked less like a place someone had disappeared from and more like a place someone had simply paused in. They searched the ground carefully. Around the tent, along the trail, in widening circles. There were no footprints leading away. Not mine. Not anyone else's. The soil was soft enough to hold impressions, yet there was nothing to follow. That was when they found the phone. It was still on the stand, angled toward the tent and the tree line behind it. The battery was dead, but the last recording was intact. They charged it enough to watch. At first, it was exactly what they expected. Darkness, trees shifting slightly, the tent unmoving. Minutes passed. Nothing unusual. Then the zipper moved. I stepped out of the tent, barefoot, whispering something they couldn't understand. My movements were calm, controlled. I didn't look around. I didn't hesitate. I stood facing the trees, speaking softly to empty air. There was no tall figure, no shape between the trunks, just me. The image began to distort. Thin lines cut through the frame. The audio shifted into a low, rising hum that drowned out my voice. The hum grew louder, deeper, almost vibrating through the recording. Then the screen flared white. The video ended abruptly. They searched for days after that, expanded the grid, checked ravines, streams, animal paths, brought in dogs. Nothing picked up my scent beyond the campsite. There were no tracks, no torn ground, no indication I'd gone anywhere at all. Officially, the report lists me as missing. Unofficially, no one had a theory that fit the facts. The phone was returned to my family. The tent was taken down. The forest closed over the clearing the way it always does. Quietly, without leaving a mark. What stays with them isn't what they saw on the video. It's the sound. They say the whisper doesn't match my voice. Not completely. And buried beneath the hum, just before the flash, there's a second pattern. A rhythm that doesn't belong to wind, electronics, or interference. A cadence, as if something else was speaking at the same time. And whatever answered it never came back out of the trees. If a dream ever tells you something you couldn't possibly know, don't assume you'll wake up safely from it. I thought I did. Until the morning I opened my backpack and found something that should have stayed in that forest. But back to where it started. I'd been hired to update trail data for Pine Reach National Forest, a quiet corner of wilderness reopened after a series of landslides. Easy gig, walk, record, map. I'd done worse jobs for less money. The only strange thing came from Ranger Collins, who checked my permit twice, then asked, "You're camping alone?" "Yeah, it's just mapping." "Then keep your nights short," he muttered. "People dream wrong out there." I tried to joke it off. He didn't smile. If his tone hadn't dipped on the word dream, maybe I would have listened. The trailhead felt colder than the town. GPS flickered, nudging my position left, then right. Like the forest couldn't decide where to place me. I chalked it up to interference and kept moving. By evening, I reached an old clearing marked inactive campsite. A rotten table, a dead fire ring, and silence heavy enough to press against my ears. I set my tent, ate, made a few notes for my podcast, and crawled into my sleeping bag. I don't remember drifting off. I only remember the moment the dream began, because it felt exactly like waking. I was in my tent, but the ground beneath it was uneven, rocky, the air sharper, too quiet. I unzipped the door. Across the clearing stood my campsite, my real one, exactly as I'd set it up. And yet, I was standing inside a second camp I had no memory of building. Same tent model, same backpack, same boots. But the backpack looked older, sun-faded, with a dent in the water bottle that I'd never made. A pulse of cold crept up my spine. I stepped closer to the original camp, reaching for the familiar pack. "Don't," someone whispered behind me. My voice. I spun around. A figure stood at the trees, my build, my jacket, my posture. But his face stayed swallowed by shadow. "You're early," he said. "Tomorrow, when you hit the boundary line, stay on the trail. If you step off, you won't wake up where you think." The two camps shifted behind me, sliding slightly, like images misaligned on a broken screen. "What boundary?" I asked. But he was already gone, dissolving into the dark like breath in winter air. I gasped awake. Morning light pushed through the tent fabric. Normal air, normal ground, one tent, one pack, no duplicate camp, no shadow self. I laughed under my breath, shaky but relieved. Stressed dream. Too much caffeine on the drive, that's all. Then I stepped outside and froze. In the mud beside my tent was a footprint, my boot tread, perfectly clear, perfectly fresh, pressed into the ground while I slept, in a spot I hadn't stepped once. The footprint should have been enough to make me turn back, but I told myself the same lie everyone tells in the woods. There has to be a reasonable explanation. I packed up, double-checked the GPS, and pushed deeper into Pine Reach. The forest felt attentive somehow. Not hostile, not welcoming, just watching. The trail climbed slowly toward the boundary line Ranger Collins had mentioned. I kept replaying the dream in my head, trying to convince myself it was just stress. Dreams steal from your day, right? They don't predict it. But by noon, I found the first crack in that logic. The GPS map, freshly downloaded the night before, now displayed a thin gray trail veering east. A trail that wasn't there yesterday. A trail exactly where the second camp had been in my dream. I tapped the screen. The trail flickered, then stabilized. "Great," I muttered. "More interference." But I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see yet. By sunset, I reached a ridge overlooking a valley washed orange by fading light. According to my schedule, I should have camped lower, but the view was too good to pass up. I pitched the tent near a dead stump, recorded a short voice memo for the podcast, and tried, really tried, to sleep without letting my mind drift back toward the dream. It didn't matter. The second night hit harder. I opened my eyes inside a tent again. But the fabric wasn't mine. It was older, patched in two places, and smelled faintly of smoke. My hands shook as I unzipped the flap. There it was. The second camp. No, not the same as last time. Worse. More lived in, more wrong. The fire ring was warm, though I hadn't lit anything before bed. My own pack lay in the dirt, but the zippers were rusted, and the shoulder strap had a tear I'd never seen before. Someone, me, had carved small marks into the picnic table. Tally marks. Dozens of them. A branch snapped behind me. I turned slowly. He stood at the tree line again, my silhouette, but not quite aligned, like a corrupted version of me. His jacket hung loose, dirt smeared across the sleeves. His breathing was off rhythm, strained. "You came back," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. "This is a dream," I forced out. "You're not real." He laughed, a hollow sound that didn't match my own laugh at all. "Dreams don't keep track," he said, nodding toward the tally marks. I started counting nights when I realized I wasn't waking up where you wake up. My stomach lurched. What does that mean? He stepped closer. "You think you're the original. You think you leave the forest and I stay." His eyes, my eyes, looked exhausted. But the trail rewrites us. It decides who wakes and who keeps dreaming. The ground shifted under my feet. The two camps slid again, that same glitching drift from the night before. Like reality was rearranging layers, I stumbled back. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said. "This ends then." He shook his head violently. "No, tomorrow is the boundary line. That's where it chooses. Stay on the path. Don't follow the gray trail. Don't look for me." The tents flickered, switching places for a heartbeat, swapping positions like the forest couldn't commit to a layout. "What happens if I do?" I whispered. He stared at me with a kind of quiet pity I couldn't stand. "You wake up somewhere, you can't leave." Darkness folded inward. The campsite collapsed into shadow. I jerked awake, gasping. Morning light, my real tent, my real gear, everything normal. Except my notebook lay beside me, open, to a page of tally marks, marks I didn't make. I left the ridge at sunrise, determined to shake off the dreams. The tally marks in my notebook felt like a bruise on my mind, but I forced myself forward. According to the map, today I'd reach the boundary line. And after 2 nights of seeing a version of myself I never wanted to meet again, all I wanted was to get out. The forest grew quieter with every step, not peaceful, expectant. Around noon, the trail narrowed. My GPS glitched between 2 points, one on the real path, one drifting toward that same faint gray trail from my dreams. I kept my eyes straight and my pace steady, but a flicker in the trees caught me, a clearing shaped exactly like the dream's second camp. I didn't stop. I didn't even breathe. I just pushed until the trail broke into a sandy trench with a faded sign, "Boundary line, authorized access only." This was the place he'd warned me about. I set camp early, hoping staying awake would stop the dreams. It didn't. The third dream snapped into place instantly. I stood in a clearing with only one tent, mine, but aged and patched like it had survived years, not days. Fog curled around the trees. A figure stepped out. Me, or what was left of me. "You crossed it," he whispered. "I told you not to." His voice sounded like static on an empty channel. "This isn't real," I said. "It doesn't matter what's real, only which version wakes up where." The forest around us flickered, multiple camps appearing and dissolving. Versions of my gear scattered in impossible layouts, like the woods were running through drafts, were trying to decide where to put me. "What do you want?" I shouted. "I don't want anything," he said. "I need you not to take my place." He stepped closer. His hand, cold and shaking, grabbed my wrist. "You'll wake up somewhere," he said. "But maybe not with the life you think you have." I yanked away. "Stop, you're just a dream." He leaned in, terrified. Dreams can't leave objects behind. Copies can. Fog swallowed him before I could speak. His last whisper echoed, "Someone always stays." The clearing folded into darkness, and I woke up gasping in my tent. Tent, real gear, real morning, no more delays. I packed in minutes and hiked nonstop until I reached my car. The forest didn't fight to keep me. It didn't need to. The dreams followed me the entire way home. That night, in my apartment, I dropped my pack on the floor and unzipped it. Something slid out, a piece of fabric, old, patched, smoke-stained, the exact patch from the aged tent in my dream. My pulse hammered as I unfolded it. Inside, written in my own handwriting, "If you're reading this, I didn't wake up where you did." I staggered back. The map of my apartment on the wall, the one I made months ago, now had a new line on it, a faint gray curve that hadn't been there yesterday, a trail, leading from my front door, winding downward as if the building now had a basement I'd never seen. I dropped the patch. Maybe I didn't wake up in the right place either. If this story unsettled you, Leave a like and let the shadows know. Subscribe for more tales you shouldn't hear after dark. And if you've seen something you can't explain, tell us in the comments. We're always listening.